season. New show, new folks, new reasons. New level, so you know we going up. South with the old, so you know we cleaning. We gleaning, brand new story. Got a podcast, come talk with Tori. Got you fiending, new stories. New podcast, come and talk with Tori.
Hey y'all, what's up? So you want to start a podcast, right? Well, do like I did. Go to anchor.fm and start recording your very own podcast today. Not tomorrow. Don't delay. Start it today, y'all. And once you get on anchor.fm, you can chop it up, you can edit. There's some editing tools that you can use on there. You can even make some little snippets to promote your podcast. Go to anchor.fm and start your very own podcast. Hey y'all, season 3. Check it out, y'all. You don't want to miss it. I have some exciting things for you. Hey y'all, welcome to TORI Talks. I have a special guest with me today, Miss Kimberly Williams. Kimberly Williams is a driven advocate with a wealth of experience caring for individuals in vulnerable situations. Williams is a graduate of the University of Florida, completed 4 units of clinical pastoral education at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center in Houston, Texas, and holds an MBA from Texas Women's University. Williams serves as the program director of the Anti-Human Trafficking Program at St. Luke's Health, where she raises awareness, facilitates training, and collaborates with community partners to provide leadership in the Texas division. She also serves as the founder and director of the Houston Area Human Trafficking Healthcare Consortium for healthcare professionals with direct patient contact in the Texas Medical Center. This group meets monthly to collaborate regarding human trafficking concerns. In addition to consortium, Williams works in partnership with Harris Health System, Ben Taub's General Hospital, Doctors for Change, San Jose Clinic, and law enforcement to research and establish training for healthcare providers serving victims in the Houston region through the PATH Collaborative. Williams has trained over 20,000 healthcare and community partners on human trafficking and has received over $4.3 million in grants to fund these efforts. Williams was featured as a guest on the Ethics Lab podcast, which explores current healthcare ethics issues, including human trafficking. Additionally, Nursing Administration Quarterly, April-June 2018 issue, interviewed her in the article titled Advocacy for All, but especially for the most vulnerable, by Kathleen Sanford, as a feature on the importance of advocating for at-risk populations within our society. Williams was featured in the American Hospital Association Hospital Against Violence Human Trafficking Special Report. Williams also serves on the City of Houston's Human Trafficking Council as the co-chair of the Direct Services Committee. Williams' publications include the Annuals of Public Health Report, creating a collaborative, trauma-informed, interdisciplinary, citywide victim service model focused on healthcare for survivors of human trafficking, digital training in the wake of a pandemic, using technology to train healthcare professionals in the identification of human trafficking victims. Bulletin of the Manager Clinic, a journal for the mental health professionals on significant components of spiritual care, Chapter 13, Human Trafficking and Implications for Spiritual Care, 2021. Williams serves as a board member of Healing Hands of Joy, a community-based, non-governmental, not-for-profit organization committed to improving the lives of women who suffer from can't say that one.
Obstetric
Obstetric
fistula.
fistula and preventing more women from developing fistula in Ethiopia. She also serves as a board member for a Second Cup, a coffee shop and nonprofit dedicated to human trafficking awareness in Houston, Texas. Williams is the founder of the Faith Collaborative, a nonprofit that provides care to survivors of human trafficking and their caregivers. Williams brings a wealth of resources and knowledge to work with this undeserved population. Wow.
Thank you. It was a lot. I told you didn't have to read it all.
But I had to. I had to read it all because, like I told you, when I skimmed over it really quickly, I was like, there's nothing that I can leave out. All of it is very important, and I appreciate you for all that you have done and all that you will do. And I appreciate you for making the time to come on to TORI Talks and talk about this human trafficking with us.
Absolutely. It's a very important conversation that I feel like a lot of us aren't having, words around because we don't know if it exists or we think or have preconceived notions about it existing. And so hopefully this is a crime against humanity, but hopefully people will understand it better, research and do more on it on their own, and then ultimately do something about it. So that's the goal here tonight or today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So usually I have questions for the individual that I'm interviewing, but being that I don't know much about, I'm saying much, but I really don't know anything about human trafficking. So, and I know that you're prepared for this because I've already told you this, but I'm just going to let you take it away and, enlighten us, teach us, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me again, and I hope that we can go over this information about human trafficking. So really, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is three main points to it, and it's force, fraud, and coercion. It's really the recruitment, transportation, and transferring or harboring of people for abduction or fraud, for improper purpose, including forced labor or sexual exploitation as defined by the United Nations. Really, when we think of force, it's someone being taken or made to do something against their will. They don't feel like they have a choice. They are usually threatened, and they are usually, their families can be threatened, so much so they feel compelled to do the work. They feel like there's no other way out. And then when you talk about fraud, maybe individuals were recruited to come to a job or come to a country or come to a city with the illusion that they would be hired for a particular job or to do a particular work, only to find out when they get there that that job or that opportunity was really not what was expected, right? And so they get there, and then it was like, hey, in order, you have to do these things in order to get paid, or they take their passports, or they make them do things that are not things that we do in a humane way. And then the coercion, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about coercion is really that factor in that, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to use this pictures or I'm going to send this to your family. Like there's no other means out. And that could also be abuse, physical or mental or emotional abuse, so that someone is so compelled to do whatever the trafficker is asking them to do that they are not able to get out of that situation. So the three main components of force, fraud, or coercion, the three main components of human trafficking are force, fraud, and coercion. And we need to keep that in mind when we talk about anybody who's a victim. We may say, they can leave or they can get out, but really that force, that fraud, and coercion keep the victim submissive, to the trafficker and has that individual trapped in a space of exploitation where they can't break free. Right now in the world, there's an estimate by End Slavery Now that there's between 21 to 45 million people that are trapped in slavery. Many of us from African American descent. That is extremely alarming, being that slavery was abolished in our country many moons ago. So why are we still dealing with slavery now? Because there are individuals in our world who still want to exploit people and use them without paying them or giving them the rights that they're due as humans in this world. Trafficking happens really all over the U.S., right? So it doesn't just happen in Louisiana or in Texas or in New York or in Florida or in California. It happens all over the country. And even though you see this heat map here that shows a lot of activity in Texas, Florida, and California, and in the north, in New York, on the eastern shore, you see all this activity happening. Just because you don't see any happening in the Midwest does not mean that it does not happen there. So this picture or this example here is to really highlight that it happens everywhere, that people are forced, frauded, and coerced into doing this work all over the country and all over the world. Wow. So when we look at, I know, wow, and it should alarm us that people are trapped and feel like they have no way out. If you talk about it just from our national perspective, there's an organization called the National Human Trafficking Hotline that takes calls and what do you call it when you call the anonymous tips to let people so that you can report that human trafficking is happening. And so, according to the Human Trafficking Hotline, you will see that 3 states have the highest reported cases. And one of those states is a neighboring state to Louisiana, and that's Texas. California being 1, Texas being 2, and Florida being 3 on the National Human Trafficking Hotline, with 10,000 reported cases and 13,000 calls from survivors or victims themselves reporting their cases that this has happened. And that being the case, in Texas, Houston is number 1 in the whole country. Houston has the most calls to the Human Trafficking Hotline. I live in Houston. I live right outside of Houston, and I work in Houston at a large hospital system where I help train healthcare professionals every day about the signs. And one of the alarming things to us is that Houston is number 1 for trafficking. And we attributed some of that to that more people are aware of trafficking, so we may be calling in more in our state to acknowledge that. But whether that's the case or not, the most important thing is that it happens here. That means it happens next door in Louisiana, and that we need to be aware of it and make sure that we recognize the signs, which we'll talk about later. So I'm not as familiar with human trafficking in Louisiana, but I know Louisiana has started some fabulous work in this space. And so according to your website, according to the website for Louisiana, in 2022, there were 992 victims of human trafficking, human trafficking victims reported, and 88% of the victims reported were identified as female, and like 79% of the victims were reported as identified as sex trafficking victims. And note here that 70% of the victims were under the age of 17. So we're talking about minors. We're not talking about adults that may have gotten trapped into this lifestyle later on in their life and they knew the decision and they could just walk out. We're talking about minors that are being tricked and frauded into a lifestyle that they had no idea was probably coming their way. And so when we talk about this map, age, this map from the Polaris Project, which I love, really highlights some really good points. What are some of the things that, Tori, I'm curious, what are some of the things that jump out to you right away? Is it large enough for you to see?
Yeah.
So we talked about on that last slide.
This 269 is.
So the 269, you're right. So sex trafficking, there are two different types of trafficking. There's labor trafficking and there's sex trafficking. The 269 represents the number of trafficked victims based on age, and the number of survivors, right? So at the bottom, it peaks, right? We've seen patients at 0 to 8, those are babies, that have been trafficked sexually. And then you've seen up to 48 plus grown people that have been trafficked. So that means everybody is susceptible, right? Or it could be, trafficking can happen to anyone based on their vulnerabilities, right? So if you note here that really where you see a peak in trafficking happening, sex trafficking and labor trafficking, you see a peak right around the age of 12 to 17. If I go back to the previous slide, you'll see here that under the age of 17 years old, there are 70% of the victims that were identified in Louisiana were under the age of 17. And this really falls in line with the national average. Here you have from 15 to 17 where trafficking peaks for individuals. That means that they're recruited and when they actually started trafficking. But look here, that's just the average. Notice that they're starting much younger and it peaking right around that age, right? And look at it peaking for sex trafficking, that people are using our young women and young men's bodies to exploit them and sell them to other people without their permission. And so when we talk about minor victims, what I really like to bring out about minor victims is that all victims are vulnerable. So think about your most vulnerable moment in your life. Maybe you just broke up with your boyfriend, or maybe you just lost your job, or maybe you lost a loved one, right? All of those things may take our guard down. And if we're younger, right, we're more susceptible to being exploited because you're younger, you just don't know how the world works, and you may not have a safety net or supportive system around you. So when you think about it from that perspective, minor victims tend to be so much more vulnerable than everyone else, right? We're in the age of, social media. And I have social media, and I enjoy it. Sometimes I'm like, I need to put this down and do something else.
Hey y'all. Y'all know one of my favorite places on earth is Starbucks. Yes, I record some of my podcast episodes here. I come out just to hang at Starbucks. I love Starbucks. Right now, summertime, so there's some new drinks that you can try. Like the one that I have here is the pineapple refresher. So yeah, just go check out Starbucks. Get signed up for the rewards program. You can get lots of free stuff once you add up so many stars on your account. So yeah, check out Starbucks and tell them I sent you.
Like, don't be on my phone all the time. But, how do kids monitor themselves from social media, right? We know as adults, everybody on social media is not your friend. And if you don't know those people on the other side of the call, right? On the other side of that phone. And so therefore, you have to be very cautious of how you talk and interact with people that you really don't know, right? Just because they say they're 15 on the other side of your phone does not mean that that individual really is 15. Exactly. Just because they say they are in high school or whatever does not mean that they're in high school. And just because they say they want you to come and live with them or they're going to take care of you doesn't really mean that that individual is. When I was growing up, for many of the people on this call or who watch this podcast, we were not allowed to talk to strangers. Talking to strangers was like a no. You were really encouraged. There were commercials about do not get in cars with people you don't know. Don't give your number out to people you don't know. Stay away and, really be cautious. But this current culture where we have it, I mean, even I get in cars with people I don't know. When I use Uber or Lyft or any of the other services out there, I get in cars with people I don't know. Now, think about our children and what kind of message that we're giving them and how they need to be cautious. Just as we, as older people, may be able to discern that this person may not be telling me the truth, our young people may not be able to discern that. And so when we have and allow them to use applications that allow them to talk to anybody around the world, they may think that this person really loves them and really cares about them and really wants their best interests at heart. And that is not always the case. It's alarming how many kids that we see that have, met somebody online and then goes out with them. And when they're out on a date or wherever, that encounter becomes very forceful and violent. And what we try to tell young people is that they're not always your friends and you don't really know these people, right? And you can end up in bad situations. And that's for the ones who make it back home. There's a proportion of kids that don't make it back home when they have interacted and become friends with someone on social media. And there's a lot of women, young adult women who may be in college, who may not make it back home, or they're men and boys, because we often forget to talk about men and boys who are also trapped in the lifestyle. Maybe they went to a job interview and thought they were getting a job to bring in the harvest, right? But then they're never paid. They're not allowed to leave the farm. They have to stay on this property at all times, and they have to work 24 hours around the clock and don't get time off. That is exploitation also. And then for very young boys, it can also be a problem with sexual exploitation. Think about a young boy who may be experimenting and just learning about his body, and he befriends a young man who's going to support and help them, or a young woman that's going to support and help them, and they think that's okay. But what ends up happening is that, do you see that on my screen? Sorry. What ends up happening is that they can be tricked, and that they can, be used, and then those pictures, it could be a threat. So those pictures could be used so it will keep the young man or the young woman in line. So we think, just walk away. Well, if somebody has can you hear me?
Yeah, I said it's not that easy.
Right, it's not that easy to walk away if somebody has pictures of you, or is threatening to send them to your parents or your loved ones or your pastor at your church. If someone's doing that, it may not be easy for you to leave. And it might not be easy for me to leave if I was caught in that situation, because I would be so afraid that the individual might share it. And then what might I do? I might comply with whatever they ask me to do. So minors are very vulnerable in that, but there are also adults that can be very vulnerable in that same situation. And here's the slide. So who is vulnerable? Vulnerable are many people, and it could be literally anyone. You and I sitting here now could lose our job, or lose a family member, or lose a support, and we're instantly become vulnerable because of our living arrangements and things of that such. So human trafficking really can happen to anyone. So really want to think about people who are recently migrating or relocating to the U.S. or to your area, because they might not know the language, and they may not know not to go to the loan shark on the corner and ask for a loan, right? Or they might not know to interact in certain places, and may just look for a job anywhere, not knowing that some people are exploited and they're not supposed to do that. If an individual has substance use or has abused drugs or anything like that over their life, or in a very vulnerable situation where they're looking for their next fix, right? They may be willing to do anything to get that next fix. And therefore, they may be able to work 24 hours or have encounters with different men all day long, or different women all day long, just so that they can get their next fix. And that was one thing that traffickers bet on, is that you have a substance use issue, that they can, tag you along the whole time, because you're trying to get your fix, but they want you to do what they want you to do. Anyone who has any kind of mental health concerns, people who may share mental health problems that would create an obstacle for them to make good conscious decisions, and where they're not under the care of a healthcare professional that will keep them on their medications or keep them focused and in good standing. Those are individuals who could literally slip through the cracks and find themselves exploited. You know, children that are involved in the welfare system, sometimes they go from foster care home to foster care home, and sometimes they slip through the cracks. Or runaway kids could be great kids, but, you know, with the wrong crowd or in the wrong area. And someone who appears to be loving comes around and really talks to them in such a way that they believe that they're loved and being cared for. And that's what we talk about. When we talk about the homeless and runaway youth. They're easily exploited. And the traffickers really leverage this victim's vulnerabilities in order to create the dependence. You know, if you're a runaway, you have nowhere to go, you're homeless, home is not home anymore, you're on the streets, you haven't had anything to eat, and you are trying to survive, and someone comes along and promises to take care of you and takes you on a good meal, what is your thought, Tori?
Right.
You're yes, oh my God, somebody's going to feed me, somebody's going to help me, somebody's going to do that. And for many of us who are older, who may be a little bit more cautious and were raised under a different platform, you know, you don't take food for people you don't know, right? You don't take money. Women, we were taught, you know, older women, we were taught you don't take money from people you don't know. Because what? They're going to expect something what? Back. And so nowadays, I'm often alarmed at the number of, you know, young people, young adults who really have this laughing joke going around about, you know, I just want to model my feet so people can pay me money, or I just want to do these things, I just want to get the money or whatever. And I mean, granted, you know, many people want money, but all money's not good money. And some money gets you in bad situations, right? And you don't want to be in a bad situation where somebody's controlling your every move by the money that you think you're going to get. And in many cases, the individuals don't even get the money. They don't get paid.
Right.
They just tagging them along the whole time, dragging them along, thinking they're going to finally get the money, or thinking that if I just, you know, sleep with this individual, if I just work in the store all night, if I just do this next massage, if I just, you know, whatever that they have to feel like they have to do, they're always kind of on the hook of trying to do something else till their next, you know, hoping that the trafficker will, you know, give them what they need. And unfortunately, more times than not, it just does not happen. You end up in the hospital, you end up dead, you end up with the more shame and embarrassment because of the time it's taking you to live this lifestyle as you thought somebody was helping you. And so with runaways and homeless youth, one of the things is sometimes they don't have a family to go back to. So they're dependent on this person who is keeping them bound. So I guess you're asking, well, you're saying all this, right? But what are some of the red flags that we really need to reach out, you know, really need to know? And here's a list right here. The Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program published this, and I thought it was such a great list. Chronic runaways. You know, if there's a child that's in your community that's always running away, whether they're in a foster family, because foster families, and there are great foster families out there, women and men that are, you know, raising children that are not their own and trying to provide. But then there are some, just like any industry, there are some that are not so good. So one of the reasons why children may run away is because that home life is not good. I know sometimes in my history when I was raised, you know, if you would see, I was raised in a very rural area, or suburban area, more somewhere between. It was moving to rural. And one of the things, you know, you would always have people in school, you know, girls and boys that may be a little more promiscuous, or you'd be like, oh, they just like to do that, that's just their lifestyle, right? But no one ever thought about it, and I didn't. You know, what is making this child, nobody that I know grows up and they want to be used and abused and exploited. No one.
Nobody.
So why are we looking at girls or boys who are walking the streets and you actively know what they're doing, right? Trying to sell. Why we look at them and think, oh, they just out there, they want to do that. No. Like somebody needs help. That's not where a child at 10, 11, 12 should be. What's going on in our community? This is what I ask all the time, especially for our community. What's going on in our community that we want to blame and shame and neglect our kids versus finding out a way that we can support and help our kids? There's no way a 10-year-old wants to be walking the streets. You can't tell me that. Tell me another one. Go ahead.
I said, can't tell me that either.
Right. So it's something wrong that when we see this happening, and we as citizens and people who know better and been taught better and don't want people exploited in our communities, need to have a higher index of suspicion that something is going wrong. And I'll talk about, steps that you can take next. Have goods or services they can't afford. So you see a 15-year-old girl with Gucci bags, Prada bags, driving a Lamborghini, and I'm just making this up. Those should be red flags to you, because usually most 15-year-olds cannot afford those kind of luxuries. And most parents aren't buying those type of luxuries for their kids. So how is this young child or even young adult affording them? And I know we're in the new age of social media and what do you call it? Your content creator, and we have all these things, sponsors, and that is good, but that's not the average person, right? And so it may be interesting to find out how they got that or how they can afford it. If you have a relationship with them, that's a red flag. That don't mean everybody with a Gucci or a Prada bag is trafficked, but it just means that that's not normal to see that excessive amounts of cash. Wads of money. Why are you carrying wads of money around? Carrying multiple hotel keys. Most people give their hotel keys up when they leave the hotel and aren't carrying them around. But some people, if they find themselves in the human trafficking, in the lifestyle, they may have to hold multiple hotel keys to provide services throughout the day. Signs of branding and tattoos and jewelry. Not all tattoos mean that you're a traffic victim, but there is something alarming when you see someone's name, right, around somebody's neck, right, that it's almost like a brand and not, something that they want to tell you about. Now, I know culture right now has it that that's kind of a cool thing, and it can be in some ways if that's what you want to do, but it'd be interesting to ask someone that has a name on their neck, tell me more about your tattoos. Those are really cute, right? Or that's an interesting tattoo. Tell me more about it. Not in a judgmental space, but maybe you're just wanting to know. And if they can't tell you why, or they become ashamed and bashful, that may be a red flag to you, like something's not right. Really restricted in their conversation and very scripted when they communicate with you. They can't really communicate with you, right? Because they are under the control of someone else who might not allow them to communicate with anybody outside of their specific group. Really lying about their age. If you clearly see a 10-year-old walking up and down the street, but they telling you they 20, we know better. And even as developed as people are these days, but based on the foods that we eat and just time, it still says something that you can know by the language and their body actions that they are not a grown-up, right? They haven't lived long enough, and they will have some of those actions that should be a red flag. Really, if you see scars and some kind of nervousness, not wanting to have eye contact with you, a red flag. That doesn't mean everybody that has a scar is a trafficking victim, but it definitely lets you know that this is something you should look out for. Really, this is probably the biggest one, and it's probably one of the hardest to detect, is really having signs of a psychological trauma and abuse, anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicides, panic attacks, and a lack of emotion or a flat affect. Because the trauma of being exploited for any length of a time really leaves an individual without a sense of hope. If somebody's controlling you in such ways that they are branding you, you're constantly feeling like you have to run away. You have these bruises on your body where you've been abused, and you have this mental psychological trauma, like if you don't make this much money this night, or you don't do these many massages in a day, or you don't do this lawn in a certain way, I do so many lawns in a certain way, that your food will be taken from you, or you won't be able to leave the compound for however long. This is how you can tell that there is something going wrong, and that you need to report through the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which you've seen the number before. But it really gives you a linkage into like something seriously wrong here, and there's some red flags. And so usually it's not one thing, it's a whole bunch of things that kind of add up that something's not wrong. Something is wrong with this individual or person because they need help, and maybe you can be that support for them. So I guess you're wondering now, which I would be wondering, and I wondered when I first learned about human trafficking, is who are the traffickers? Like, who are these people out here abusing and exploiting other people in such ways? You want to say, oh, it's just rich individuals that have this money, and that could be it. But it also could be people just like you and I. It could be anyone, any individual. Business owners, gangs, family members, unfortunately, intimate partners, owners of farms or restaurants, powerful corporate executives or governmental representatives, and even religious leaders. We've seen it all as individuals who have exploited others. So, and you can't just say it's one group of people that are traffickers. They come from all spans of walks of life, and from every ethnic origin, and for any gender demographic. So we can't say all traffickers are men, and we can't say all traffickers are women. We've seen both men and women traffickers, and it's very unfortunate. So how does one become a trafficking victim? And then we talked about this a little bit, but one of the things I wanted to really point out here was that you can also be a male or female from poverty, developmental delay, abusive environments, lack of resources, and even an immigrant, and find yourself in a vulnerable situation. So what do you really do when you find yourself or you find someone else who may be a traffic victim? You call for help. And who do you call? You call the Human Trafficking Hotline. I wouldn't, if I saw somebody with the red flags, I wouldn't run out there and try to be like, hey, you can't traffic her, right? You can't save them. That's not your job. Your job is to identify the red flags and then call and note them, and then call the Human Trafficking Hotline, where you can get an anonymous report, right? And you can say, hey, this is what I saw. I think this individual is in trouble. I'm calling to report it. It's at the corner of X and Y. And, the individual, this is what I saw happen. And that's your job as to, being able to report it. If you know a family member or a friend that's being reported, you can also let them know that here's the Human Trafficking Hotline number. And it's really easy to remember, 888-3737-888. So it's written like that, so it'd be easy to remember. And if you have anyone, now that you know more about human trafficking, you can't say you don't know now, right? You can't use that excuse. And so now that you know better and know more about it, now it's your responsibility to tell someone else about it, so that no one will end up trapped in this lifestyle at all. Some resources that I hope will be helpful to you, that I think would help you learn more about this issue, that you can keep the learning going and also share it with other people in your circle of influence. The Polaris Project, the website there, they collect a lot of data around human trafficking, have videos, and I just recently saw on Facebook that they have an opportunity for you to go to do the training online. They offer training right online for you. Shared Hope is another organization. They give every state a letter grade. And I forgot to look up Louisiana, sorry. But look up for Louisiana for me and tell me what the Shared Hope grade is, and then email me. I want to know if you have a chance to look at that. Also, Homeland Security, the DHS.gov, the Blue campaign. If you go on the Homeland Security's website, you'll see so much information. You can order free posters, you can download posters, and those posters are so helpful. When I first learned about human trafficking, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I went to the websites, learned, did just like you're doing now. I heard someone's story, and when they told me their story about being trafficked, I went and learned more, and I was able to, do a program at my church at the time to help raise the awareness in my community about it. And one of the ways is like handing out posters, putting posters in your schools, asking for permission, of course, seeing them if you can post them in the bathrooms, because you never know who is in your circle of influence that may be trafficked or fear or prone or vulnerable to being trafficked. So we want to make sure that we're able to spread the word and give information out. And the Homeland Security website really has a good list of resources from posters and videos, right? In addition to that, you have the Center for the Human Trafficking Prevention Resource Center of Louisiana. I went to that website today, and it was really great to see all the resources that your community has. And let me see if I can just share this screen real quick. Did it go here? So if on the website, you'll see here a listing of resources right in your state that can help you learn more about, notice I said branding, and here's some examples of branding right on the website. You can use the website to find different services in your region or to report if you suspect it. So there's a lot of resources out in the community for you in your state and around the country that I have shared also. The last slide, I believe, is for more information. You are definitely welcome to email me at kwilliams@Faith Collaborative. I started my own nonprofit before I started working in the hospital because I had such a passion and a call, I feel like, toward helping human trafficking victims get out of their situation and also prevent people from being exploited in the space of human trafficking. So I'll pause right now because I'm sure that Tori may have a question as I move to another slide deck to talk about a little bit more about what my own passion is.
Yes. Thank you. I am mind blown. And you told me I would be. I think for me, the most surprising was the age, under 17, and even like babies. And it hurts that someone would take that kind of advantage over a child. Even though the numbers weren't as high as 15 or 17, but one is too many.
It's really hard to even working. I know I can kind of speed through slides because I really do this every day, and I wish I could say that I've seen it all, and every time I think I've seen it all, I see something else. But the truth of the matter, it hurts every time I see another child that's been exploited. The truth of the matter is that it hurts our heart, and it should. It should hurt our hearts. We should be alarmed. We should be really angry that any child is having to go through, anybody is having to go through that, wherever they're from. And the sad part is it doesn't just happen in the U.S., it happens around the world, so it's a world thing. But in the U.S. particular, where we have seen the effects of slavery, we know what that kind of trauma happens and does to a people, we should just be up in arms. And I would, I think the last numbers I saw was that out of all the human trafficking victims that are seen, 70% of them happen to be black females. So on top of everything else, of all those alarming numbers, that black females are more susceptible to trafficking and their vulnerability and exploitation more than any other. Those are the ones that we see. So there could be some that are out there that we don't see. But I often ask the question, and would love to do a series on this, like what's going on in our community that our black girls are being exploited in such a way, and then black boys are on that list too. Why do we think that the young girl that's walking the street, she's a young girl walking the street, why do we think that's just what she wants to do? Why wasn't our first thought that that is not something that she should be doing and she should get the help that she needs?
Yeah.
So that brings us to the. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Before you go there, another thing that that struck me was who are the traffickers? Because I guess in my mind, I'm thinking like, then forgive me, older men. I would never think the family member, unless it was like an uncle or something, but not your parents. I would think of like mafia type, individuals. So that was surprising to me as well.
Yeah. And it should be surprising. We know that most of the people that are buying sex from, just like most of the, I think it's nearly 70% of victims happen to be black female. And then I think it's about 90% of buyers happen to be white males. So that tells us something. So that's the buyer. That doesn't tell us about the demographics of the seller, the trafficker, because we usually don't see the trafficker, right, until it comes to court, right, and then it's a big thing, right? So, and we've seen none of those demographics point to just one group or one is more than the other, right? We've seen them, like a cheerleader at her school looks like she's doing, like the greatest student, but then she is trafficking a disabled student at a developmental delayed individual student at her school. So she was having that other young girl sleep with people, but she was also still in high school. So what made her feel like that would be okay? That you could exploit another individual. We've seen police officers, we've seen healthcare professionals, unfortunately. So it's not just one individual, but we do know that many buyers, most of the buyers, because they can be picked up from law enforcement, either caught in the act or trying to negotiate a deal through texting or some kind of app and get caught. That those tend to be, the buyers tend to be white male, and that the victims seem to be black female. So, I mean, that's another, conversation about objectification of black girls, and, feel like nobody needs to take care of the black girls. There's a lot of rhetoric and information behind that, and that's for another show. But you definitely, that's alarming.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We are gonna make this a two-part.
Okay.
And so, with that being said, thank you so much. And if you want to hear part 2, you have to come back next week because it's about to go down.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing everybody part 2.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for joining me today as I talked with Kimberly Williams. Don't forget to check out part 2 next week. Part 2 of Human Trafficking next week with Kimberly Williams. Thank you.